We're going to switch gears a little bit here, actually getting away from attribution, but staying with data. And this is something a little bit different. I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with Channel 4 in the UK, but it's one of the most innovative TV channels. It has, I would say, the youngest, correct me if I'm getting this right, the youngest audience of all the major TV channels. And as I go around to various sort of global TV conferences, I keep hearing these presentations about all that they're doing with data. They've created a very innovative way to have kind of a data relationship, you know, for a network with their customers and their viewers. So let's give a warm welcome to Sarah, who will tell us a bit about how they've been doing this.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. It's really interesting sitting in this room hearing about the US version of all the same challenges that we have. The UK market is different, but no longer that different, not least because our competitors are now your competitors in a way that wasn't the case before. So I'm really enjoying this afternoon. Okay, so I'm what stands between you and the break. I'm going to give you a break already from attribution, and just as Jane said, give you just a little case study about what we've been doing in Channel 4. We've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now, so I don't want to be selling it as a brand new strategy this year. It's something that's really embedded in our organisation. And you'll see why as I go through. There we go. So, but for those of you that don't know what Channel 4 is, we are really, I think actually we are genuinely unique in the world in that we are a publicly owned but commercially self-sufficient organisation. The public ownership component of that, state-owned, means that we have a very particular remit in our licence to cater for minority voices, to bring diversity to screen, not just to go for the most popular commercial programming. So that runs through our DNA. At all times, we have to ensure that we don't just promote the most popular, that we promote as broad and wide and diverse a range of content as possible. Think PBS, but with a commercial network rolled into one. So we have what my 4-year-old called the channels where things just come up, the linear channels. We have the main, Channel 4 is our main mainstream terrestrial broadcaster, been around for 35 years, and then our digital spin-offs, which all launched a good 20 years ago now. More 4 is lifestyle and factual, E4 is entertainment, Film 4 does what it says in the tin, 4 music likewise, and 4/7 is one of those clever means of sitting on the EPG and recycling the same programmes for commercial gain. But what I want to talk to you about is not on the service where things just come up, but the service where you choose what you want to watch, which is our on-demand service, All 4. I moved to Channel 4 from ITV, which is the major commercial broadcaster in the UK, 10 years ago to launch this service. Because we are smaller than most of our commercial competitors, and actually to give you a sense of our size, we're about 12% viewing share in the marketplace, 26% commercial share, because the BBC, of course, is so dominant in our market. But because we are therefore the third of the 3 sales houses and the smaller of the mainstream commercial competitors, we're always trying to be as aggressive as we can just to push the boundaries as quickly as possible. And we like risk, it's inherent in our remit. So when on-demand became technically possible, we embraced it and we put all of our content for free on demand. We were the first to do that. We launched even before the BBC, actually. Obviously, it brings with it all sorts of challenges, and cannibalisation was a word that peppered every single paragraph we uttered. But we knew that the consumers were going to go there, so we had to go there. Spooling forward, that was 10 years ago, about 5 years ago, just as Netflix was launching in the UK, which is maybe helpful market context, as data became one of these very trendy words, no one quite knew what it meant in the broadcasting sphere, we likewise replicated that going there first thing. So we knew that our audience were both diverse but also loyal. Our brand values were incredibly important in our market. That is absolutely our guiding force at all time, the trust we have with the viewer. But we felt that trust was in a good enough place, and we also knew that we needed to drive our commercial revenues further, and that this was an opportunity coming down the track, not least as the digital giants got their act together with advertising in our market. So we wanted to launch a data strategy. To do that as a broadcaster, we had to bring in a completely different set of people. I manage a data science team who are so different to the more traditional broadcast employees that we have. And we had to beg, borrow and steal from other industries. Our tech department, which had traditionally been just looking after broadcast playout, is suddenly looking after not just UX design and MVT testing, but data algorithms powering our service. So it really was a complete culture change for us. But we changed our infrastructure, and as a result of bringing the right people in, we then had to actually go out and get the data. Now, we launched registration on all four, as I said, about 5-6 years ago, optional on catch-up first, and then on archive, and now on all of the content that's on the service. We did it very carefully. This was an era when people weren't really asking for first-party data. Consumers didn't really know what it was. We were very nervous about shaking that brand trust and position that we had in our market. So we thought really long and hard about how best to do it. If we had a learning, actually, it's that we were a little bit too cautious. I think actually, because of the nature of the trust that we have with the audience, we probably could have gone a little bit further, a little bit quicker. For example, we didn't mandate postcode for a couple of years, and obviously that's very important for any sort of targeted advertising. But when we did, and we even then didn't make it mandatory, we made it optional. 83% of people still give us their postcode details. So actually, I think we could have been more aggressive, but softly was very much our approach. We also used our brand, so I think this is going to work. There is a longer version of this on our website, but just to give you a flavour, we undertook what we call our viewer promise, and we made this really core to our whole approach to data, including using one of our, at the time, key on-screen talents to promote it.
At Channel 4, we're in love with you, you lovely viewers. We're so in love, we want to get to know you even better. So, if you sign up with Channel 4 on, say, 4OD, we'll ask you for your name, email address, and a few other details. When it comes to your details, we'll make you this promise. You control any personal information you give us. And if you ever want the details you've given us back, we'll wipe them from our system.
For more information about Channel 4's viewer promise, go to channel4.com/4viewers.
Now that was what we launched with them. Actually, I'm afraid I don't have the latest cut for you, but we're just about to relaunch it. Partly because it's time to refresh, but also because, I think it was mentioned earlier, we face GDPR regulation coming in. It's European regulation, and even though we are trying to get out of Europe, there is no silver lining because we're taking it with us. So I spend a lot of time on this at the moment. I mean, philosophically, you have to welcome it. It's about respecting the consumer and giving them their rights so that they are fully aware what's been done with their data, and if they're uncomfortable at any time, they can withdraw it. But it means that things like consent levels and subject access requests and removing data are much, much, much more onerous on the data collector now, and the fines are eye-watering, so it's suddenly become very real. Now, happily, as I said earlier, transparency and control are at the heart of our approach in the first place, so this is something that actually, compared to, bear in mind, this is cross-industry in our market, compared to other, especially e-commerce players, we're not in as bad a position as they are, but nonetheless, it is a very significant shift to abide by new regulation as we keep rolling this service out. Anyway, we have this data, and so now what can we do with it? So obviously you'll be very familiar in the room with trading against demos, and we in the UK, as I'm sure you know, have a single JIC, Barb, which provides us with the luxurious position of unifying measurement that everybody trades on. The UK ad market, for those that don't know, is about 4 billion. Channel 4 takes about 1 billion of it, to give you a sense of the scale. Our digital revenues, incidentally, are 100 million. So 10% of Channel 4's revenues derive from digital, but about 5% of our viewing in aggregate is derived from digital. So you can see that it's if we make it work, it's a much more valuable portion of the market for us. We know that not all 55 pluses are the same, and therefore actually doing it by demo and by age feels a little bit old hats, and the digital players themselves have not really operated like that for a long time. So we wanted to look at our database and segment it through taste. Now, when we have the data, we obviously use it partly commercially, I'll come to that later, but partly creatively within the service. And I think it is creativity, actually, it's not just tech. So we have about 16, 17 million registered users now, half of all 16 to 34s in the UK. That's a very large number, but actually those that use us every year is about 9 million. So we segment our users base of about 9 million. It's not credible for us, with the size of the output that we have, to cater for every single user individually within that. But we can cater for taste groups within it. So we called it internally the sort of grape to lychee approach. We want to segment our viewers by things that we know they collectively like together, irrespective of age, gender, or postcode. For example, those who like grapes. We then want to introduce them to neighbouring segments that are a little bit different, and we want to introduce content into their selection of output on our service that we think they might like lychee. Not that big a stretch to go from one to the other. The viewers themselves will never know they've been segmented. They won't have a sense of where they sit or that we're playing around with them in this way, but hopefully the personalised service that they will start to see will be of a better quality and more relevant. What was that phrase that one of the panellists used earlier about engineering relevance into every interaction? It's sort of our way of doing that. So how do we do it? I'm going to give you a little bit of science now. At the time, this is a year or so ago, we had 15 million registered users. I said a few more now. We took all the hours over a period of time that they'd viewed across nearly 2,000 individual programme brands. This really is the science bit. On the left-hand side, imagine that that's an enormous Excel spreadsheet with every single viewer that's ever used the service. On the top, every single piece of content that they've ever watched. We then group that into sections of content that the same sort of people watch. So we can see that the aligned taste, not always as obvious as you might think, there's some surprises in there. We take those groups of content into what we call topics. If you're a viewer, you may move over time between taste segment, but the topics remain the same and consistent. We come up with 9 topics. Why 9? It felt manageable, and I'll come on to the human manual intervention part of this in a moment to explain why manageability was important. As I said, the viewers never know which topic they're in. They never see these names, so they're just our names to understand the collections of content. You can sort of guess what some of them involve. Actually, Yankbank, you can have a go if you like. That's our US comedies for the most part. And then we introduced what we call a concept of smart curation. Now, this is harking back to where I started, which is where public service meets commercial. We can't just drive the most popular. The basic means by which simple algorithms work, which is driving the most consumed content so you see more of what you like, has to be a bit more nuanced in our part. Otherwise, the more diverse, the more minority appeal content won't surface. So we use editors on the service, and they take the output of the taste segmentation work, but then overlay it based on all sorts of other forms of research and sometimes just a good old-fashioned editorial gut to make sure that the content that's recommended is broad and diverse enough. And then depending on which, this is actually a slightly old now, user interface example of all 4 on a browser, depending which segment you fall into, that's what you see on your homepage. Now, we've been running this live, rolling out gradually over last summer for about 9 months now, and the results are really interesting. Warts and all, I wouldn't say that every single one has worked. I mean, interestingly, Hollyoaks on the left-hand side, which is a daily soap, appealing almost exclusively to 16 to 24s, but 16 to 34s more broadly. When they come into the service, they just want to watch Hollyoaks. So although we looked at all the other types of content associated with it and served it up to them, actually, those in the Hollyoaks segments who got the other content watched less because it obscured their means of just getting to what they came in to see. Huge learnings for us in that. Whereas Alt-Brit, which introduces older content and American as well as the contemporary stuff on air, does incredibly well. When this works, there's an uplift at the moment of around 5% of views. Not enormous, but that's an uplift for which we haven't had to fund any more content. That's just because we've been using the content better. So if you think that we have 100 million base and growing really quite significantly at the moment, then a 5% uplift with no money expended apart from some data scientists modelling this is quite sizable. Obviously, this doesn't just apply to the creative and product side of it. It also applies to the commercial segments. We've been using interest-based targeting for some time. I haven't got time now to take you through our whole advertising strategy, but I'll just summarise it as ABC. A is audience, demographic targeting, pretty obvious. B is behavioural, interest-based targeting. And again, to use the phrase from the panel earlier about muscle memory, the market is moving slower towards that than we had expected. So actually, a vast majority of our digital revenue is still traded on demographics. But nonetheless, we think it's important to keep innovating and expect the market to evolve. And then the C is the R&D project we're working on at the moment, which is contextual. So this, we're taking metadata from programs, and then it's a little bit like very sophisticated product placement. It's not going in the shows. That hasn't really taken off in the UK. It's putting adverts around the shows that we know are connected to what's in the programme that the consumers have just seen. So, for example, if somebody in a drama drinks some wine, then the first advert in the break will be for a wine vendor. The research on that, which I'd maybe come and present another time if we establish it, has been extraordinarily successful. I mean, better than anything we've ever seen. So we've got high hopes for that, but it's still R&D. Back to the B of the ABC, which is the behavioural. So the existing segments you can see there, and there's other ones we're launching at the moment. You'll notice that these are quite large all in the millions. That's because with a service of our scale, we are not going to be able to effectively target a man in Manchester who is age 23 and likes cycling. That's not what we do. We want to be able to credibly, back to that attribution point, credibly and sustainably provide segments that we feel are going to be effective for quite broad groups of advertisers. Yeah, a little bit more science here. Just very briefly, what we do with all of our registered users, we take out, we have to bring in third-party research here. So we use Experian and Research Now panel to get a sense of people's habits beyond their TV viewing. It's not enough just to do what they watched on telly or on VOD in the last week or so. We identify behaviours connected to the matched people in the middle there. We identify their behaviour in the wider world, their normal means of watching television, so which device, watching VOD, which device they watch it on, which programmes they watch, and then we do lookalike modelling on our base, and that gets you to the broader target segment. We are definitely finding means of it working. The means by which we are attributing that is working specifically with the advertisers who we did some trials, and they have given us quite a lot of feedback on take up or whatever the brand is. There's a couple of examples here. We're definitely managing to charge a higher CPM as a result of the increased ROI. And that's only going one way as other players in the market do things that are less traceable. So that's the personalisation based on taste segmentation approach. Obviously, recommendations, Netflix launched in the same year as we started to gather data in the UK. Recommendations have become completely normal in the market now. We had to find a way of doing them that was more overtly targeted and more overtly personalised if we were to have any chance of competing on that plane with bigger players. It is really quite difficult, and we have spent quite a long time trying to work out how to get it right, again, so we don't send people down that echo chamber, so that we automate, but at the same time ensure that we provide a broader range of content back to the DNA of what we're here for. So we used our data science team again. We did a lot of, using human beings in a different way this time, a lot of testing about what recommendations felt right. We tested them tirelessly, and we've come up with, and I say this is a work in progress. When they work really well, but things matter like where it is on the page when people come into the service. Things matter like which order of recommendations you put. So the cadence really makes a difference. The first 2 or 3 recommendations that people see are the most important, because that's their opportunity to build trust with us as a brand that recommends things to them. The 4th on the page, we generally have about 5 at a time. The 4th gives us a bit more license to stretch, and the 5th can be a complete wild card, and that's why we put some of our more public service content in. But people do watch it if they are sure that what we've recommended them, that they're more comfortable with, has been appropriate and apt, back to that relevance point. It's really hard to define what good is, and we do of course have the benefit of watching an uptake in that viewer's behaviour on our service, so we can track it very overtly. We try not to be too obvious or too narrow. We don't want to uninspire. We want to stretch people, grape to lychee. We want to take people out of their comfort zone, introduce them to new programming, but doing so from a starting point that we feel it has got some resonance with them already. We want to add some surprise and some serendipity, and we don't just want to show the most popular. So that's my data science team. We like to, because Channel 4 is small, we talk in terms of world's first quite a lot. We did launch the world's first VOD player with all our content, and we did the world's first video personalisation. These are a few years ago now. I won't play them just in the interest of time, but you may well have seen some of the creative over here. Because of the registered database where we have people's names, we were able then to insert their names in adverts. So the Coke sort of speaks for itself, share a Coke with, whatever your name may be. And Burberry, we went one step further. We inserted their, oh, it is playing. We inserted their name on a perfume bottle, their initials, based on their registered user. Possible for them to click on a button, and that engraved perfume bottle would arrive the following day. That was quite a feat, I have to say. But Burberry, we got name checked in their annual results for no reason, because it did genuinely uplift sales of that line. So we feel this personalisation, when used properly, can both drive consumption of our service as a whole and genuinely stimulate different engagement with the advertisers. And because it's first-party data and it's on our own service, we can show, we can really track a lot of the usage. We like to keep doing things first. Our last world's first was audio. This is going to take 5 seconds to start. The tech is not broken. It's just that there's a countdown to give you the chance of opting out, either if you don't drink, because of course we do have 16 plus on our service, and also in case people don't want to have a personalised ad with a view to GDPR coming down the line, not force it down people's throats. But this gives you a sense of where we've got to most recently.
Nice one, Walter. Putting the bombs out first.
If there were steaks in a barbie, they'd be well done.
G'day, fellas. William and Ralph Foster.
There you go, mate. Try not to drop it.
Foster's, for the thirsty.
John, mate, this one's for you.
The registered user was called John, just in case. So all sorts of issues come out of this as a broadcaster, not speak as an advertiser for a second. How many personalised adverts we have in our service. We don't want to creep people out. This needs to feel sort of appropriate and fitting and enhance their user experience and increase the warmth they feel towards us as a trusted provider of content, not just to feel like we're stalking them and it's at any one time they're going to hear their name coming out of their browser. But it is getting a lot of interest. We've done 3 or 4 of these now, and the user feedback, most importantly for us, is really, really good because we compete with ad-free VOD services. So if we can make the ad component of our free service one that people are engaged with and are interested in and have a higher cause to recall, then it's win-win. Thank you very much.